Kit Fisto was a renowned Jedi Master who rose to prominence during the Clone Wars. A survivor of the initial engagement on Geonosis, Fisto went on to become a noted war hero, serving with distinction at such battlefronts as Mon Calamari and Khorne. He even engaged and very nearly defeated the infamous Jedi Hunter General Grievous. Fisto was eventually named to the Jedi Council, and was one of the 3 masters chosen to accompany Mace Windu when he went to confront Chancellor Palpatine, who had been ousted as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. In the ensuing duel, Fisto outperformed both Aegon Kolar and Saesee Tiin, both of whom were struck down in a single blow, though he was ultimately no match for Sidious either, and was struck down mere seconds later. Kit Fisto would be remembered as one of the Jedi Order's greatest sword masters, and for his easygoing nature. Darth Maul was the personal assassin of Darth Sidious, originally an Iridonian Zabrak but recently retconned as a Dathomiri Nightbrother. Yeah, I don't like it either. Darth Maul was the product of a lifetime of intense physical training. He effectively operated as Darth Sidious's errand boy, cold as that sounds. Maul was involved in the Naboo crisis in 32 BBY, and bested Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn after a heated duel, but was cut in half by Jinn's apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I will not be taking Darth Maul's survival into account, simply because whatever cybernetic appendages he uses to replace his legs will drastically change his capabilities. Kit Fisto was a renowned Jedi swordmaster, and was notable as one of the few duelists who could match the infamous Jedi Hunter Grievous. He was a high-level master of the Shi-Cho lightsaber style, the first classical form developed by the Jedi Order, intended as a simple tutorial style, but when taken to its highest levels, it becomes a wildly aggressive and randomized fighting form. Accordingly, Fisto was wildly aggressive and random in his fighting form. He was a highly skilled acrobat, demonstrating a great deal of speed and agility. As a Shi-Cho master, Fisto was highly effective against groups of opponents, and was an expert at blast deflection. He was a master of unarmed combat, and has been described by observers as a martial arts hurricane. He had some skill with dual blades, and has demonstrated a talent for recognizing and taking advantage of openings as soon as they're presented. He also had some talent with improvised weaponry, beating a pair of bounty hunters into submission with a pair of heavy-duty wrist cuffs. His own, incidentally. Fisto was a good tactician, a given thanks to his experience as a military leader, though he was occasionally reckless, sometimes losing himself to the aggression of Shi-Cho. In his own way, Kit Fisto skirted just as close to the dark side as Mace Windu. Kit Fisto was also experienced at chaining force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, though he only did this when necessary, seeing more fervent uses of such a technique as excessive. Fisto's offense was wild and utterly unpredictable, though, as mentioned, sometimes reckless and overly aggressive. His defense was staunch and reliable. While Kit Fisto was a master of Shi-Cho, taking full advantage of all the focuses of the style, he was also saddled with a few of its weaknesses as well. On the whole, he was no slouch in single combat, but he was still weak against individual opponents, twice shown by his defeats at the hands of Asajj Ventress and later Palpatine. However, he was still good enough not to die instantly when he fought the latter, unlike his compatriots, and had generally earned his reputation as a great sword master. A product of a lifetime's worth of training in physical combat, Darth Maul was skilled enough to best high-caliber Jedi swordmasters and fighters, with Ciolo Urmanka, Anun Bandara, and Qui-Gon Jinn among his kills. The two most prominent fighting styles in Maul's technique were Zhuya and Teräs Käsi. Zhuya was the highly aggressive penultimate lightsaber form, relying on bold direct movements and attacks, backed up by highly advanced force-assisted acrobatics. Teräs Käsi, meaning steel hand, was an unarmed fighting form created to allow ordinary beings to combat force wielders, and was based around the anticipation of strikes and great physical discipline. Maul was also a master of the Naiman form and classical Jarkai dual blade fencing. It's pretty obvious that most of Maul's lightsaber moves were Zhuya style, while his acrobatics and physical attacks were Teräs Käsi strikes. Due to Zhuya's purely offensive focus, it's logical to assume that all of his defensive maneuvers were derived from Naiman, appropriate considering the style's root in Surisu, though this is pure speculation. The mental disciplines of Jarkai revolve around visualizing and being constantly aware of both weapons in one's mind, a technique easily applied to the saber staff. Maul was highly effective against multiple opponents and blaster-wielding assailants. On the topic of blasters, Maul was also a capable marksman, though he considered blasters uncivilized and rarely used them. In keeping with his skill in Teräs Käsi, Maul was a master of unarmed combat. Maul was also quite skilled at chaining force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, in keeping with his study of Naiman, though he rarely did so, desiring a purely physical victory and considering the use of such tactics to be a sign of desperation. Maul balances tactical ingenuity with split-second intuition, preparing and planning out his fights beforehand, but keeping his strategy flexible. Offensively, Maul was relentless and overwhelmingly unpredictable, fueled by the power of the dark side. His defense was strong, and he had little difficulty defending against two high-level Ataru specialists, and while he could be caught off guard, he was usually able to rally, unless he gets hacked to pieces, that is. On the whole, Maul had a spectacular combat technique, demonstrated extreme versatility, and had a keen tactical mind. But he was also overconfident, extremely overconfident, and has made some really stupid decisions on the basis of overwhelming arrogance. Much like my Kit Fisto vs Ulic Qel-Droma matchup, here we have two highly aggressive warriors, with diverse skills backed up by a huge amount of battlefield experience, and both are bold almost to the point of outright recklessness. However, while Maul toes the line of recklessness and fights with strategy and tactics in mind, Kit Fisto leaves it in the dust. While Fisto is fully capable of relying on tactical ingenuity and often does so, he frequently loses himself to the aggression of Shicho and simply tries to power through his opponents. And based on Maul's track record, this is precisely the sort of tactic that he optimizes himself towards dealing with. Trick the opponent into cutting loose, give ground, and guide the fight to a location of your own choice. Then use the combination of home field advantage and the opponent's fatigue to crush him. On the flip side, Fisto had little difficulty in adjusting his own methods to counter the strategies of enemy duelists, and wouldn't allow himself to be led by the nose in such a fashion. This duel would play out as a head-to-head confrontation, and in such a contest, the strengths and weaknesses of their techniques would become more and more apparent. Fisto's weakness against single opponents would play to Maul's favor, and given his effectiveness against Qui-Gon Jinn, I have no doubt that Maul would be able to hold off Fisto's frenzy. Darth Maul gets the edge as a martial artist. Kit Fisto was a Nautolan male and remained in the prime of his life. Now, because I happen to have in my possession the Clone Wars campaign guide, which contains Kit Fisto's role-playing game statistics, I can tell you exactly what his physical capabilities are. His strength is 14, which means he can lift 140 pounds above his head in a military press. Dexterity is 14, and his constitution is 15, so he's extremely fast and tough. He also enjoys a number of physical advantages common to his species. As an amphibian, he can breathe underwater and is an excellent swimmer. He is capable of detecting the pheromone levels in others, allowing him to sense and anticipate their actions. Maul is in his mid-20s and is in extremely good shape. Classic martial artist's physique, a lean, mean fighting machine. Now, as I happen to possess the Threats of the Galaxy supplement for the Star Wars role-playing game, I can tell you with absolute certainty what Maul's physical capabilities are based on his statistics. Strength of 17, so that's 170 pounds above his head in a military press. Dexterity of 19 and Constitution of 16, so really fast and insanely tough. Typical of Zabrax, Maul has an extremely high pain threshold, reinforced by ridiculous levels of self-discipline. The only time this guy ever flinched was when he was cut in half. Now, if we just go by the numbers, Maul has the advantage, being considerably stronger, faster, and tougher than Fisto. Seeing as these are the primary attributes behind martial prowess, which is definitely going to be the deciding factor in this matchup, I'm inclined to agree. However, Fisto's ability to anticipate the actions of his opponents based on their pheromone levels is a major wild card and must be considered. In the end, though, Darth Maul gets the physical edge. As a Jedi Consular, Kit Fisto focused primarily on his Force abilities, and accordingly demonstrated advanced powers. His telekinetic abilities were highly advanced, and he had little difficulty chaining them into his lightsaber sequences, though as previously mentioned, he rarely did so, considering the usage of such a tactic excessive. Given his amphibious nature, he focused on taking advantage of his aquatic abilities, and his Force abilities clearly demonstrated these leanings. Notably, he was able to use telekinesis to influence water currents while submerged, disrupting enemy movements. He even created a unique Force ability, colloquially referred to as the Force Water Orb. Essentially a telekinetically reinforced bubble, the orb functioned much like kinetite, or the dark side spear of midnight black, in that it acted like a solid object and caused either piercing or bludgeoning damage to whatever it struck. The Force Water Orb caused the latter. However, while formidable, Fisto's ability to manipulate water currents was only applicable underwater. His telepathic abilities were also reasonably advanced, and he had little difficulty with mind tricks, though more advanced abilities like Battle Mind or Battle Meditation evaded him. Overall, Kit Fisto was advanced but highly specialized in his applications of the Force. Darth Maul was a capable Force wielder with a lot of natural talent, and was noted as one of the most promising apprentices in the Sith Order's history. Maul's skills with telekinesis were relatively advanced, and he has used Force Grip to torture and kill specific targets, as well as applying it tactically, an example being when he used a thrown piece of wreckage to trigger a set of door controls, opening up a greater dueling space. Maul also had some skill with Force Lightning, and was able to resist its power and continue fighting when subjected to it. However, as previously mentioned, Maul rarely applied these abilities in combat, considering the use of such tactics to be a sign of desperation, and instead desired a purely physical victory over his opponents. Maul's telepathic abilities were also reasonably advanced, though he wasn't able to conceal his dark nature from Jedi as his master could. However, Maul was highly resistant to standard telepathic techniques. An Iktachi telepath who tried to probe him promptly went insane and fell into a coma. Maul was also versed in the Mekuduru art, granting him almost supernatural levels of skill as an engineer and mechanic. However, while a cool skill, Mekuduru doesn't have any applications in combat. While Kit Fisto's more sophisticated applications of the Force were quite impressive, they are also far too specialized to be of much use in a contest on neutral ground. Picture an arena or warehouse that they have both just entered. No water. Now, I'd have to say that in their more basic applications of the Force, namely telekinesis, they match each other quite neatly. While Fisto has never been shown choking someone out with the Force, that doesn't mean he can't. Considering the circumstances behind Fisto's applications of his aquatic powers, I'd have to say that he clearly understands how to apply his Force abilities in a tactically advantageous manner, something Maul is also quite good at. Given that they match each other tit for tat in their more mundane Force abilities, and the fact that Fisto's sophisticated powers are too specialized to be of any use, I have to declare Darth Maul and Kit Fisto equal as Force wielders, at least in regards to how they stack up against each other. Kit Fisto's lightsaber followed a simple and utilitarian design. Fisto's lightsaber was designed to accommodate fighting one-handed, with the threaded hand grip positioned along the middle of the hilt and the activation and control switches positioned accordingly. While this design no doubt came in handy when Fisto fought with dual blades, he typically fought two-handed, though that's probably where the rounded pommel comes into play, fits better into the palm. Mechanically, Fisto's lightsaber operated on a bifurcating cyclical ignition pulse, which utilized two crystals to allow it to ignite and remain active underwater. This mechanism was backed up by flashback water seals in the hilt that protected the electronics. Fisto utilized two green-hued Adagan crystals as the focusing lenses. It should be noted that some sources have depicted Fisto wielding a blue lightsaber, though this is likely just a mistake. Darth Maul's lightsaber was strongly inspired by the traditional Iridonian weapon, the Zabaka. Effectively two lightsabers conjoined at the pommels, Maul's weapon featured a much longer handle than the traditional lightsaber, allowing for more leverage on power attacks. He utilized 4 red-hued synthetic crystals as the focusing lenses, 2 to each mechanism. Synthetic crystals traded maneuverability and control for greater cutting power in the blade. Maul opted for the weapon because he felt that standard lightsabers were too limiting, and thought that it made more sense to be able to strike with both ends. The extra blades provided more surface area for attack and defense, allowing a skilled wielder to do both with only a minimum of movement. However, for every advantage provided by his weapon, Maul was saddled with just as many weaknesses. The extra blades rendered many movements and positions extremely difficult, if not impossible, to execute. Also, the enlarged hilt itself was a large target, a weakness that even an experienced saber-staff wielder like Maul was prone to. Given Kit Fisto's experience with and against dual blades, I don't think a saber-staff would faze him all that much. With that taken into account, the primary edge of Maul's weapon, essentially its novelty value, is nullified. After that, the weapon still provides greater leverage and power thanks to its long handle, an attribute that would play to Maul's advantage thanks to his greater strength, and the ability to fire off attacks extremely quickly with only a minimum of movement. However, providing these attacks with variety is quite difficult, as so many moves are hampered or rendered impossible by the extra blade. And then we consider the massive target presented by the hilt itself, a weakness that even Maul, an experienced user, has been unable to fully compensate for. Fortunately, Maul was smart enough to ensure that his lightsaber utilized two separate mechanisms, enabling at least one blade to continue functioning even after the weapon is cut in half. While Maul's weapon has a truckload of weaknesses, it has just enough advantages to make up for this. Kid Fisto's lightsaber, on the other hand, while a fine piece of craftsmanship, provides no major advantages beyond the standard. Darth Maul's lightsaber gets the edge. And now, the verdict. Given the fact that both duelists strongly refrain from the usage of Force abilities in combat unless absolutely necessary, the deciding factor in this fight is going to be martial arts training, and all the elements that reinforce that. Straight up, as lightsaber duelists, Maul has the obvious advantage, as he'd be able to hold off Fisto's frenzy, and Fisto's weakness against lone enemies would play to Maul's favor. This advantage would be further reinforced by the fact that Maul is so much stronger and tougher than Fisto. Now, I imagine that Fisto's abilities to anticipate Maul's actions based on his pheromone levels would go a long way towards making up for these weaknesses. I don't think it would be enough. Then we come to their weapons, and while Maul may suffer some disadvantages due to his impaired movement, it's not something that he isn't able to compensate for. Worst case scenario, Fisto hits Maul's saber hilt, and Maul keeps going with a standard lightsaber. The result is obvious. Maul can match all of Fisto's attributes and tricks, and has one-ups and effective counters for each of them. I declare Darth Maul the winner. This is just my opinion, so feel free to chime in. Short comments below, essay comments either emailed here or sent to my YouTube message board, providing you're one of my contacts. This is Jinsare, the Nerd Rage Ranter, signing off.